Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. This is the Ideas Factory. I am Naghma. Joining me is Professor Pant. On this episode of the Ideas Factory, we shall begin by looking at the China-US relationship. Of course, there is an Indo-China angle also, but we will look at the Sino-US relationship because former US diplomat Henry Kissinger visited Beijing and he received a very warm welcome, which was in sharp contrast to the welcome that was accorded to the top three US diplomats who had recently visited Beijing. Henry Kissinger received a warm welcome. He received warm words of praise, and Xi Jinping was quoted as saying that Sino-US relationship probably will always be linked with the name of Kissinger. However, the US State Department has said that this was his private visit, Kissinger's private visit. It has got nothing to do with United States governments. It wasn't under the aegis of the US government. Anyhow, Harsh, we would like to understand what is the mutual interest that Kissinger and China have through this visit by Kissinger and the words of praise that he received there. Of course, there is a history of Kissinger being in China and is China's friend. But the Biden administration has been trying very hard to restart the high level of contact with their Chinese counterpart, which actually the Chinese balloon incident blew up. But right now, China hasn't been very positive about it. Can Kissinger play a role here? What is he looking at? And China praising Kissinger. How do you see this unfolding, or will it play a part in the China-US relationship?
Thanks, Naghma. Kissinger is Henry Kissinger, as you know, he has enormous clout. But I think today he might have more clout in China than perhaps in Washington. And he's also known, his role in, the opening up of US to China in the 1970s makes him a very unique figure in the annals of Sino-US relations. So now, of course, he's he's celebrating his 100 years, and I think his visit is being looked at through that lens. But my own sense would be that this visit was as much about Kissinger coming and shaping the narrative around the US-China relationship today, as it is about his own legacy. Because at the moment, Kissinger's legacy is facing a problem. Kissinger has always, in fact, he has been saying this recently, that look, US and China have to work together. We cannot have a peaceful century. We cannot have a peaceful global order if the two countries are at loggerheads. But the positions that the two governments have taken, in some ways, for Kissinger, maybe they do not do justice, perhaps, to what is the larger realm of Sino-US relationship. So what perhaps it seems that he has of course gone there as a private citizen, as the Biden administration also mentioned. But it is also about resurrecting that legacy of Kissinger, on the annals of US-China relationship, which perhaps he also wants to restate and restart. And make a case that, look, the two nations have to work together. So in some ways, even though he may not be an official emissary of any kind, but given his role and given his stature, he can certainly initiate or push the two nations into a dialogue. And as you mentioned, Xi Jinping was particularly fulsome in his praise, making a big deal about welcoming him, hosting him, saying some very interesting, warm words, which Xi Jinping rarely smiles, but he was very smiling all over the place with Mr. Kissinger. So clearly, I think that perhaps from Beijing, the attempt was to frame it that, look, we want to have a good relationship with the US, but it's the Biden administration that is at fault, and that the official US relationship is at fault. We are engaged. We want to be engaged, and we have seen that there has been an attempt to defrost the relationship in recent months. After the balloon incident, everything was frozen, but now we have had not only Tony Blinken but also Janet Yellen and most recently, the climate czar also being there, visiting China to talk about areas where they can cooperate. And I think while the US is not budging from the fact that certain red lines exist, the areas of economic cooperation, climate change, perhaps are areas which have traditionally defined the ambit of Sino-US cooperation. So, when you see the Kissinger visit through that lens, you can see that this can also perhaps become one more episode in that reopening to China at a juncture when the two sides are hardening their positions. So, if the message from both sides are that they are willing to, negotiate, willing to talk, and then I think this message will reverberate in the bureaucracy. This message will reverberate in the corridors of power, and something may come of it. But I think
Yes.
the visit, as you can see, is perhaps more about Kissinger's legacy than it is about the present predicament in Sino-US relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's more about Kissinger's legacy. And like you said, the US China relations has been on a decline, especially after the balloon incident and even during Biden administration. And China clearly sending that message forward that it is the problem lies with the Biden administration. And Washington Beltway politics is very polarized in many things, but there seems to be a bipartisan support as far as China is concerned. China has increasingly been seen as a rival than a partner. Harsha, I would also like to understand, the Germany's new strategy on China. Germany recently released its China strategy, where again it calls Beijing a systemic rival and stresses the need for Europe's largest economy to reduce the dependence on China and also look at the geostrategic the importance and the safety in this angle. And economic relation has to be fair, it has to be sustainable. So, what are the salient features or the key takeaways from the strategy that Germany has presented towards China, and what difference would it make, and what is the difference in approach that we will now see between Germany and China? China has been its biggest trading partner, but what difference can we see now?
Yes, I think Germany's, the China strategy is very interesting, and I think Germany itself at the moment stands at at an interesting moment because uh, Germany is trying to redefine its position in the global order. Germany is trying to redefine its strategic priorities, and what China has been trying to do in the past is trying to break the transatlantic partnership by wooing the Europeans. And I think what Germany and Germany's China strategy tells us is that increasingly the West is converging on the China issue. That yes, there may be differences in terms of the extent, the scale, and scope of what they want to do. Europeans may not want to go as far as the Americans are willing to go. But I think when you look at a country like Germany that has traditionally had a very strong relationship with China, and that has also been very unambiguous about that relationship. This idea that we need to protect our equities, economic equities in our relationship with China, has been an underlying theme of this relationship. In fact, former Chancellor Angela Merkel she really embraced China in ways which were quite unprecedented. The idea that Germany should have a strategic partnership with China, and not really talking about the contentious issues that bedevil the relationship between the West and China. Now that framework has been broken now. This idea that we will not touch the contentious issues just because we want to preserve the economic relationship, that comes out very, very clearly now from this strategy. The other aspect that comes out very clearly is that the government in Berlin, German government, is telling German companies that you are at your own risk. You have to now calculate the risk of doing business in China and think carefully that government is not going to bail you out. You are on your own. And that's a very stark message to send to German companies, because we have seen how Western companies have faced pressure in China in recent years. And many in the corporate sector in many countries have been expecting that the governments would come and support them. Instead, here a very categorical line is being drawn by the German government. So I think in some ways Germany, Berlin, is making it very clear that the tide has turned in their relationship with China. That they are going to look at China through the lens of a quote unquote problem state. Uh, you know, uh, while they will not cut off their ties with China. They will not try to damage their ties with China. After all, both are getting prosperous. But on whose terms this relationship is being framed, that will need to be redefined. And I think they have made a good case of balancing their economic requirements with their differences with China. How do you manage that? It remains to be seen how it is implemented. It also remains to be seen how this approach is embraced by other European countries. Germany is a leader. Germany, in economic terms, is the biggest economy in European Union. So a lot of the other European countries will be looking at this very carefully and thinking, should we now approach China in a similar manner? Of course, EU has its own China strategy, and EU has been also very categorical as a unit, as a bloc. But I think individual countries now coming out with these strategies, and incidentally, the report in London that came out, all party report on China, that was also very interesting because that report was also very damning, and it said that look, the government in London, British government, is not doing enough to manage China threat. And in fact, that report also blamed academics, for because they want grants, because they want outreach to China. They're not sensitive to security concerns that come with that kind of an engagement. So I think we are seeing this, which we have been observing for some time, the souring of mood vis-a-vis China, and the expectation that somehow this will get mellowed down after some time. That is not happening. In fact, the positions seem to be hardening. And that will certainly shape Chinese attitudes as well, because so far China was trying to adopt a strategy of dividing the Western countries, of at least the transatlantic relationship. The idea was that let's keep on wooing the Europeans because the Americans look at us as systemic rivals. But I think we are now looking at this convergence in the West on this issue of what China's rise means, both in strategic as well as in economic terms.
Absolutely, and like you pointed out that it's not only Germany but some other European countries too who are coming out with their individual China policy, and that probably will affect EU's approach towards China too. So while maintaining the trade and the economic relationship, they are more wary of or more careful about their safety, their sustainability also, and that is important. That is the difference that we are seeing there in this strategy towards China. And the term that was used was systemic rival. So China's, like you pointed out, policy will also change of their dealings with European nations. Now, if you move away from this area and look at what's happening in Israel, there have been dramatic visuals that have come out of Israel where we've seen thousands of people protesting outside the parliament, on the streets, with Netanyahu government's bill, which, in a way, it has done away, or it has taken away Supreme Court's ability to review the government's unreasonable decisions, and hence it gives more powers to the government. The opposition boycotted it. People are protesting. Now, will this legislation bring a balance between the government and the judiciary, as is being claimed by the government or the ultra-right? Or how dangerous is this rise of authoritarianism that is being seen in Israel? And another question that comes to mind is, this will definitely affect Israel's policy or approach towards Palestine, or rather give them a free hand in their approach towards Palestine.
Yes, I think Israel is going through a serious crisis, one of the most serious ones that we have seen, because it is not simply about civil society protesting. The ambit of civil society now is pretty wide, and we have seen, for example, the debate reaching all the way to Israeli military, where the reservists are saying we won't function, we won't be part of this enterprise, and I think. What is problematic, all democracies have this debate about balance of power between various institutions of governance. Executive, legislature, and judiciary are often in conflict. In all democracies, it happens. You see it from time to time. But I think what people perhaps are questioning is the intent behind these moves. That if it were a different political party, if it were a different leader that was making this argument, perhaps the resistance would have a different hue. But today, I think a lot of them see this as part of extreme right trying to dominate the policy agenda. B, they also see it through the lens of Netanyahu, who himself is facing so many charges, and so his personal relationship with judiciary. Perhaps people are saying this is all about him. trying to wriggle out of the corruption charges that are against him pending in the court. So he's trying to then put the pressure on judiciary and try to create a more pliable judiciary. But in terms of I think the the robustness of Israeli democracy, I think it's also very heartening to see that you have in Israel a very robust democracy that that takes initiatives, that the civil society is engaged in the process, and that civil society continues to make a case for political reforms. Now, for Netanyahu, of course, his coalition partners of the extreme right are putting pressure on him to do some things. They believe that the Supreme Court often looks the other way when it comes, it takes decisions based on not on merit but on the ideological biases. But that's a political argument, and I think that political argument could have been made differently and could have been debated differently. Now what they've done is they've gone ahead and passed one part of this major overhaul, which is the one that you mentioned, the reasonableness provision that the Supreme Court has. I think people are now wary that the entire bunch of legislation that was being recommended, perhaps that will be pushed further. Although Netanyahu himself has said that I want to have a broad engagement with civil society from now till October, when the parliament meets. I will be engaging and talking and trying to figure out what can be done. But I think it's the intent behind these moves that people are questioning, and that will of course have an impact both in terms of Israel's ability to do things within its territory, but also its ability to engage with the regional players at a time when there is so much turmoil in the region, and Israeli democracy was generally seen to be a force for stability. But today you
Absolutely,
see that
yes.
stability becoming very problematic. That stability disappearing, and people questioning the government and questioning the way decisions are being made. So I think it will have a long-lasting impact on the character of Israeli institutions, and it will have an impact on the way Israel conducts its business with its partners. So I think in some ways Israel is at a point which we had not seen in the past in terms of the domestic mobilization on a relatively small issue. But I think for a lot of the people, it is resonating because they are feeling that the wider ramifications for Israeli democracy can be quite severe if we do not manage this well, if we do not push back against Netanyahu's agenda. So I think it has really taken on a turn for the worse, and we'll have to wait and watch and see how perhaps the street manages this with Israel, with the government of Israel.
Sure, like you pointed out, that Israeli democracy probably is, one of those robust democracies in the civil society there, where in the entire region that people were looking up to. But this robust civil society is probably being undermined with the changes that are being brought there, and the rise of the authoritarian government that we're seeing, and a lot of protests against that, and that's kind of heartening to see that there are people coming out on the streets protesting these. Now, Harsh, before we wrap up this episode, would want to look at the week that is the month that has gone by, where Prime Minister Modi visited France, and on his way back, he also made a stopover in UAE. Yet again, there was a lot of hype, of course, about the France visit, and in terms of the defense cooperation, the Prime Minister being accorded the highest order there. So our relation, vis-a-vis the France visit with Europe, and of course the ever strengthening ties between India and UAE. If we can recap this visit.
With France, Naghma, it has been a very positive journey so far, and I think the visit was about celebrating the 20 years of our strategic partnership, 25 years of our strategic partnership, and also mapping out the next 25 years. I think a lot of what we heard from the statements, from the vision document, it was about where this relationship goes from here. That is the question, because one of the strengths of India-France relations has been that they've been very adaptable. They have adapted very well to changing circumstances. During the Cold War, we were close friends. France was one of the few European countries that stood by India, both through supporting us in the UN on critical issues, as well as sharing defense technologies and other technologies with us, despite European sanctions on a range of issues. So I think, and then when the Cold War ended, France really adapted very well because it was very easy for France to adapt. And now we are looking at the Indo-Pacific becoming the center of gravity, and both India and France, as two resident powers there, trying to map out. Again, during this visit, we saw a roadmap for Indo-Pacific cooperation being mentioned, because that is going to be the fulcrum around which this relationship will evolve for the next 2 decades. So there is much that is there in terms of defense partnership, energy partnership, technology partnership, that we are looking, looking at France for. And the trust level is very high, and that helps, because if you look at the political trust between the two nations, that has been the driver of this relationship, that we don't have to question the things that we are doing with France in ways that perhaps in other countries it becomes problematic. With France, we know that we have had a long-standing partnership. The friendship is there, and we know that on some of the most critical issues we are on the same page. In particular, I think this idea of retaining strategic autonomy in foreign policy, that independence of decision making. We don't want to side with major blocs all the time. We want to retain our autonomy to decide our own future. That is a striking fact about India and France, and what brings them together. So I think Prime Minister's visit was a celebration of all of that, as well as laying the foundations for the next 25 years. We will see some of the defense deals have yet to be finalized. And I think as we move forward, as India diversifies its defense partnerships, France will be a very, very important partner in several respects. And France is more than willing to co-produce and co-develop in India now. So I think that also is a major part of Indian initiatives. Now, if you look at the UAE, and which is again very interesting, that India has a trilateral with France and UAE that India tracks, India sits in. And I think the Prime Minister making UAE as one of his destinations is an important signal that how significantly we have moved the goalpost on the Middle East issue. In our partnerships with the Middle Eastern countries, and UAE, of course, is a primary partner there. And at this time, we saw IIT Delhi campus opening there, and I think knowledge partnership. Again, I think with the UAE, the idea is to make our relationship with UAE forward-looking, 21st century partnership about knowledge economy, about technological cooperation, about climate change, and about all the other aspects that are defining contemporary realities for India and for UAE. So I think that serves India very well, both bilaterally with UAE as well as regionally with a part of the world that is so critical part for us in terms of our foreign policy and national security outreach. So I think those two visits in some ways reflect India's aspirations both on the European front as well as on the Middle Eastern front. And they have, the outcome was symbolic of the achievements that India has had, both in its partnerships with Europe in recent years as well as its partnerships with its Middle Eastern partners.
Absolutely. Both these visits by Prime Minister to France as well as to UAE really define what is India aspiring for as far as its relationship with the Western world, with Europe is concerned and the Middle East is concerned. Thank you so much for that explanation and that analysis, Harsh. That's all that we have time for on this episode of The Ideas Factory. Thank you for watching.